Would we benefit from a transparent Pfizer? Is the government a co-parent of your children? What tax rate is fair? We answer these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we gather the good takes and the bad takes of the internet. We break down what we like or dislike about them and try to offer our viewpoint as to why they're good or maybe what they got wrong. My name is Donald and I'm here with my co-host Britt. Before we get going, make sure to follow us on the socials listed on here if you're watching. It's Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on the other places if you're listening. So follow us, give us a like, share, all that good stuff. We love comments and engagements. And if you have any takes you want us to take on in the show, we're happy to take those too. We love it. So feel free to send those to us at any of those channels. Without any further ado, let's move on to our first take here. And this one comes from pro-life libertarian on Twitter, who's quote retweeting Dave Rubin. So the first Dave Rubin tweet reads, "Spent last 2 days at Twitter in San Francisco talking to engineers, product managers, and yes, Elon Musk. Learned a ton about what's going on. Before I share, want to note that after a couple-hour meeting, I asked Elon what I could share, and he said, anything that's true." And then the thread continues. But the pro-life libertarian quote retweets this with the caption, "Imagine if Pfizer invited people in and took an anything that's true approach. We wouldn't need Project Veritas, would we?" What do you think about that, Britt? Do you think that's a fair assessment of Pfizer and of Twitter, respectively, I guess?
Well, it's kind of hard for me to interpret like the tone of what Dave Rubin was saying, Elon Musk was saying. Like, anything that's true, is he basically saying like, hey, Dave, you could say literally anything that's in here, just don't lie about what
yes.
is that? Okay.
Yeah, that I went through the thread and was reading. Yeah, he was just saying like anything we talked about, as long as you're not making anything up, go for it.
Yeah, well, we would still need Project Veritas, but maybe not for Pfizer.
Yeah,
because I think there's tons of different actors that are bad out there that wouldn't take that. I guess if you broaden that to the rest of humanity, sure. So I think it's still a good take, right? Like if companies took the stance of like, yeah, like we have other than like trade secrets, right? Like how we built the iPhone or how we make the secret sauce or whatever. You could share all of our practices are open door. I think, as some other people said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And that's a really good thing, right? That a company would do that. It builds their brand. It builds their trustworthiness. The public likes them more. And it's also a really great way for them to actually get real feedback, right? Like that's, Dave Rubin going out and sharing all of the different things that Twitter is thinking about doing. That's really beneficial because now Elon Musk is going to be able to get market feedback, right? Based on different public thoughts or, outcry or, likes or dislikes. All those things will help him make a better product at the end of the day. So I think a lot of companies would do well to do that. And I'm imagining, this is pretty recent, right? So this is probably in the back of Project Veritas. I'm not sure if you've seen that video yet, but of the R&D director totally freaking out and assaulting them when he said we were doing gain of function. So, that's kind of the opposite side of it, right? Like we're going to lie and not tell the truth to the country because we believe what's best, and what's best is for us to make money.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a lot of Project Veritas stuff that around Pfizer. I saw, some of it talking about. I don't remember if this was through Project Veritas or if it was through the Twitter files or leaked info that way. I don't exactly remember which source this was from, but how the officials at Pfizer were talking about people who were having reactions from the vaccine. And they were talking about it very candidly with each other behind closed doors. And it was leaked that they knew that the vaccine did have side effects and that it was a very realistic possibility that it was not as tested as they were saying it was. So, I think the common thing that a lot of liberty-minded people have been saying is, you don't have to be an anti-vaxxer to think that what Pfizer and the whole COVID regime has done was terrible, right? I'm not against the idea of vaccines, but I'm also very much against the machinations of the government pressuring businesses and using their own regulations for public events or public jobs or whatever to pressure people into taking a vaccine. regardless of the level of the vaccine, I would still disagree, and I still to some degree do disagree with pressuring other kinds of vaccines. But it's particularly problematic when it's over a non-vaccine, they're calling a vaccine,
Yeah.
that is not tested in the same way or as long in the same way as other quote unquote vaccines. The crazy thing is people talk about how, oh well, the mRNA research, even though it's new, it's been tested for years and it's been expedited or whatever. But the thing is, it hasn't had human testing in the same ways with the controlled groups and non-controlled groups. So yes, it can be tested for a long time in a lab, but without actual real human testing in controlled environments with study, you don't know what the full ramifications of that are. So to use pressure in those ways on people is heinous. And as these, Project Veritas has highlighted, the people knew there were ramifications to the vaccine. And if they were open and honest about it, they could have said, look, we know that there are some, very, very small percent of people have some side effects for this. If you want to take it, then you should. If if you're vulnerable from COVID, if you're an older population, or if you have a lot of comorbidities, it's probably worth the risk because COVID is a greater risk to you than these things. If you have transparency like that, people get to make the decision and the market gets to work in that way. Of course, that doesn't work for authoritarians who try to push it on everyone, regardless of risk levels.
Yeah, I think another kind of way that people would interpret this this tweet is that, well, sure, like the free market would work if every company was open and completely honest 100% of the time, but that's not true, right? Like we have companies like Pfizer, we have companies like ExxonMobil, Enron, all these places that will lie about different types of things that they're doing or practices that they're doing that might not result in a good product, might result in a harmful product or things like that. But to that, I would say, the reason companies can get away with having bad product, with having product that hurts people, especially Pfizer, since that's the subject of this tweet, is that they are immune, right? The government has stepped in and said, hey, if you took this, let's just say it was free to choose, right? Like if you took this vaccine, like you are no longer able to actually even like sue if you got damaged from it, sue or hold Pfizer liable for any damage that they did to you. Likewise, the second some of this news started coming out that people were being hurt by it, it would be a newsworthy source. So news places would want to report on it. And therefore people wouldn't buy that vaccine or the mRNA vaccine. So that's the thing about the free market that's great is that, yeah, it accounts for both actors that are completely 100% transparent. It rewards them in a lot of ways. It also might be their doom, right? If they do a bad job, but you wouldn't want their product if they did a bad job anyways. And at least they spared you the time, effort, and resources. And you might trust them again, right? If they're open and honest with you. And it also condemns bad actors because, yes, there's going to be people that get hurt, but at least the company that brings those things out will either pay the penalty from someone holding them accountable for losses that were negligently caused, or by the fact that they're going to just never be trusted again, right? They're bad actors that the public's going to say, yeah, I don't want to buy their stuff, and the market will make that verdict. So in either way, the ability to be open and honest, but also have the freedom, right? That's the key part of it. The freedom to choose what you're going to do, what type of medications you're going to put in your body is very, very important. And it results in a more balanced and better world.
Yeah, I think about with the news going on. I was just watching Megyn Kelly's show. She had Dave Smith on, so I was watching that because it was really interesting. And one of the things that they brought up, because it's in the news and it's kind of relevant to this, I can't think of the name of the company off the top of my head, but Elizabeth Holmes, who's on trial for this medical
Theranos.
company. Theranos, thank you. Yeah, and how Dave Smith brought up the really funny comparison point, and I totally cracked up because he was so right. How she was essentially like Will Arnett when Will Arnett was on The Office, where he's applying for the boss position, and they're like, all right, well, why would you be a good fit here? He's like, I've got a plan that will double this company's profits. And they're like, okay, great. What is it? And he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you the plan. And they're like, well, how do we know you have
You get one part of part 9 of the plan.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give you the third part of part 2 or whatever, which is super funny. And that's what she was doing. And obviously you do have to have a level as a company of discretion as to what you're going to share. You can't put it all on the table. But the people who are on the board, as they pointed out, were people like General Mattis and a lot of like high-ranking officials and people who should be able to see past this and know better. And my point here isn't necessarily to link the two exactly, but just to say that the government obviously was in a position where they saw the products that Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Moderna were making and said, we are smart enough to know that we are going to essentially force or attempt to force the majority of our population to inject themselves with this thing. And if in that same echelon of people are people who are on the board of Theranos, like they only got caught years later because someone started digging. But in the exact same vein, you know, you swap Pfizer out with Theranos. They could have easily required you to purchase Theranos' service because, it's going to change medical records. And if you don't do it, you're a bad person because we won't be able to know how to cure diseases. You're being selfish. They could have easily done that for a complete quack, faulty product. And frankly, in the case of Johnson & Johnson, more than anything else, they did because they don't even sell that anymore because it got called back because it was so problematic. So all the Theranos example isn't to say the government had anything to do with that directly, but to say that the board of people who were approving that and the people who were giving it the thumbs up and cheering and saying this is a good thing are the exact same types of people who are in power. And the only difference between the two is that we weren't forced to take the Theranos stuff because it stayed somewhat private. It wasn't into the public sphere like these vaccine companies.
Yeah, people make mistakes, right? It does not. People seem to think that it's government approved, like it's gone through this crazy, amazing, vetted process that means it's bulletproof. But what people don't understand is that almost 30% of drugs that are approved by the FDA are recalled. I think it's within 5 years of them being released because there's some crazy bad thing that happens. They're like, man, we missed this, we goofed up. Now we need to recall this drug. And the thing about Theranos too, it's like, okay, which is better, right? Like government and General Mattis and all these guys put their stamp on it. And because they have this office of authority and validity because of their position they've held, people buy into it. And Elizabeth Holmes is able to scam almost $9 billion out of folks, or at least scam enough money to make her net worth appear to be $9 billion. And it's like, well, there's that approach. And then there's the approach of show us something that works. If you can really diagnose with our pancreatic cancer with a prick of my finger from the blood, yeah, I'm going to spend $200 on that. That's pretty amazing. And they would have totally, gobbled up market share because they'd have a huge advantage. The proof is in the pudding. And my pastor was giving a sermon on this a few weeks ago. He's like, the proof of the pudding is actually comes from the pudding is haggis, right? So it's like meat stuffed in lamb's stomach. It's not like nice pudding. And back in the medieval times, what they were basically saying is hey, the proof of whether you're going to get food poisoning and die from this, whether it's actually good haggis or not, is in the eating, right? So the full quote is the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So eat it. And if you live, great. If you die, well, I guess that means the pudding was bad. And so that's the free market. Yeah, to quote our friend Larry Sharp, the dystopian future is already here, right? There is already people that get hurt because of bad actors in the market. Most of the time they are protected by the government, right? And so they're able to persist long after they should have been put out of business with their bad practices. With the free market, though, that damage is minimized.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The dumb, Paul Ryan, Ayn Rand, Rand Paul, and Paul Ryan walk into a bar and they die because it's unregulated. It's like
no one's going to go to that bar again.
I was going to say it's more like Paul Ryan or Ayn Rand, Rand Paul, and Paul Ryan had to get the jab because they weren't allowed into the bar without one, and then they died, and the company was completely immune from any damages.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent. And I will say
we should make one of those and put it on our page.
Yeah, maybe I will. And haggis is not that bad. I will say I've had it in Scotland, and it's not that bad. It's not pleasant, but it's not awful.
And you didn't die, so the proof of the haggis was
I'm still here.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. No repercussions as far as I could see. Okay, moving to our next tweet here, and I'll have to give some context for this one. So the main sort of actors you need to know around this is, as of recording, on the horizon there is a massive Hogwarts Legacy Harry Potter game coming out. It's supposed to be a big open world deal, high production value, big budget. Harry Potter, of course, is the intellectual property of J.K. Rowling, the author. She herself is a very outspoken feminist who has spoken out against the idea of trans women being let into women's sports and the way that men transitioning into women are displacing women and things like that. So if you'd gone back like 15 years, J.K. Rowling would not be an ally to the right or the cultural right or conservatives. She was by all means an avowed feminist. But in 2023, conservatives, because they are constantly moving with the forward as progressives driving the speed limit, have taken her as a hero because she is willing, and I will say to her credit, willing to call out some level of nonsense from trans activists that want to pretend that there is absolutely no difference between a man or a woman, and if you just inject yourself with the right hormones, you magically become a woman. So anyway, so she owns the Hogwarts, and we'll be getting revenue from the Hogwarts Legacy game coming out. Big deal. And so now that's kind of one spectrum. And then the other aspect is in gaming. A couple of years ago, there was a Twitter account made by this guy, Tristan Cooper. And the Twitter account was, "Can you pet the dog?" And the entire gist of the account was it would feature a game in a tweet, and it would, if the game had a dog in it, it would say whether or not you could pet the dog in the game. It would say, nope, you cannot pet the dog in this game, or yes, you can pet the dog in that game. And it became such a huge cultural phenomenon on Twitter that many games either retroactively updated themselves to add petting into their games for whatever dog, or were made exclusively at launch with petting for no other reason than to get approval from this account, because it became a thing that gamers looked for in the games because they thought it was kind of fun and wholesome. So all of that is your summary. Here is the first tweet comes from Harry Potter Film, which is the official Harry Potter account, I think. And it tweets, "Yes, you can pet the cat in hashtag Hogwarts Legacy." And then they tag the account, "Can you pet the dog?" And so the owner of that account, on his personal account, Tristan Cooper, quote retweets this, saying, "This is a new low point for Can You Pet the Dog? I put so much time into something that people like, only for it to be absorbed into the marketing machine benefiting an abominable TERF." TERF standing for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. Okay, that was a lot of wind out of me. Britt, what do you think? Is this a new low point for Can You Pet the Dog?
Yeah, but not in the way that Tristan would like it to be. I mean, it's I would say to him, it's like, man, like, can you imagine all the effort that went into building 7 books, writing 7 books, producing 8 movies, producing this massive open world game. It looks dope. I don't think I'll probably get it because that's not really my speed, but it looks amazing. Like, you can basically be a wizard in a video game, which is pretty cool. But all the work and man hours and stuff into that, all for it to be absorbed into the marketing machine of can you pet your, whether it's you can pet the cat or not, right? Because they're petting a cat, not petting a dog. So, yeah, it's like, man, these people, like, I think this is a terrible take. It's really petty. It's like, man, just it's looking to dislike something they're trying. Is it a dude? Is it? I don't even know.
I think
Tristan,
okay. He's a guy, I believe.
Tristan, is trying to elevate himself by making a big deal about something and taking personal offense of something that he doesn't know anything about. It's like such a minor part of it, It's like, oh, I don't like how they spelled Hermione's name or something, because I had an aunt who died who was spelled the same way. It's really petty, awful. And it's a symptom of the narcissism that I think is really present within the current age of, like, if I'm a victim, then I am important. And therefore, for me to be important, I need to create situations where I am a victim. And this is like a really weird, awkward, and again, petty example of that.
Yeah, it strikes me as the same kind of energy as musicians who strike their music from like a specific rally. And on the one hand, I get it, you have the right to do that, but the funny thing is, this Tristan, he doesn't own the idea of petting cats or whatever. And at that point, beyond the idea, he's he successfully created a cultural thing, right? This idea of petting your pets in video games as a standard feature, like, that's sort of, it's grown beyond him. And so for him to think, oh man, it's a new low point that this, massive game is adopting this thing and calling it out specifically. It's so terrible because it's going to go benefit a turf. I think one, it's ignorant of the, you don't own ideas in that way. And so sure, it's obviously a direct reference to the thing that you created and built, but in many ways it's gone beyond you at this point. And yes, they're tagging the account, but that speaks more to the size of the thing you've created than anything else. Two, to pretend that like this is just all going, this particular feature is going to specifically enrich the pockets of J.K. Rowling is such a stupid idea. There are so many people who work on these games. There's so many people who benefit from this. And I mean, it'd be like seeing a picture of Donald Trump playing a video game and being like, this is a pretty cool video game, and being like, this is a new low point for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The fact that I created this game and Donald Trump is enjoying it. It's like, okay, calm down. You are providing something that millions of people are enjoying, whether it's through adoption in other video games, whether it's something you've created directly. And to focus on the idea that like one person you don't like is getting benefit from it is so petty.
Yeah, that's not even like your example is even closer than this person is, right? Like the better example would be that the Ubisoft or whoever developed some game and they paid rent to Donald Trump for an office building somewhere.
Yeah, you're right.
And then they in the new Splinter Cell, you can pet the dog, and Tristan's like, how dare they? They rent offices in some obscure corner of New York City from a Donald Trump building. Like, I don't want to support that. It's like, okay, like, get over yourself. Like, there's literally thousands of people, right, that have worked on this game, that have done really cool things, that have sweated and had tears and maybe even blood over how this thing was made, because it's so difficult, right? You spend so much time to make anything. Don't get all up in knots because the Twitter page. I'm not familiar with Can You Pet the Dog, but I'm just assuming it's a Twitter page that asks whether it can be pet or not, and that's as far as he's taken it. Yeah. Something that you analyze a game from one dimension is more important or is worthy of casting shade on this game that other people spend so much time on. That's more beautiful and more intricate, even if it's not a good game, right? It's still a testament to workmanship that it was made in the first place.
Right. And it's like it's absorbed into the marketing machine of it's like, oh, get over yourself. One, I guarantee you 0 copies of this game are being sold because you can pet the cat in the game, right? If nothing else, that's just a fun engagement metric for them. Yeah. And then the other thing that I think is funny is like people like this will complain about the marketing machine benefiting an abominable turf, and then they really don't complain about any other game companies until some sort of crisis occurs, but they'll just keep consuming other stuff. It's not a marketing machine unless the company has a bad track record of something they don't like. So it's like, I don't know, Nintendo puts something out and like maybe the Smash community that feels burned by them will be annoyed, but most people like this, they don't care about that. They're not gonna be like, oh, the marketing machine is using this pet the dog thing. It's only when you attach it to something bad does it become the marketing machine. It's like, this is probably honestly like a group of like 4 people who thought, hey, that's funny, let's incorporate this into the game. The programmer said, sure, it's not that difficult. We program it, animate it, awesome. And then the marketing intern tweets this out. So get over yourself with the marketing machine I was like, okay, all right.
I'm not gonna. I'll go browse Can You Pet Your Dog, but I can't. I can't follow him. I'm not gonna get absorbed in his marketing machine.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's abominable that that he's advertising for himself there. Okay, our next post here comes in a reply to Randy Weingarten, who is the head education, the president of the teachers union, I believe.
Yep.
And she has this article, I think it's from time.com. And it's titled "Poll: Most Parents Don't Like School Culture Wars." And then Moms for Liberty replies, you started this, Randy, and now we are going to end it, with the attached image of "We do not co-parent with the government." So what do you think, Britt, about co-parenting?
Fantastic. I mean, I'm assuming we're not debunking. We are evaluating Moms for Liberty's
Yes.
tweet.
Yeah.
It's a very good tweet. This person is totally right. I'm assuming it's a mom, so she is totally right. And it's kind of crazy is that just 8 years ago, people were saying things, the homeschooling movement saying, hey, like, we don't really like how the government is, like with truancy laws and such, how they are invading and encroaching upon a parent's right to decide what their child does. I had a friend back in Kingston who, they decided they wanted to go take their kid on a 2-week trip. And they're like, well, we're just going to pull you out of school and, work ahead in your assignments and all this stuff. The teacher at the school was fine with it. But because some administrator got wind of it, actually reported them. And it put them in this whole rigmarole with the truancy laws and CPS and all this stuff. And it was a whole bad thing. Obviously it turned out okay. The kid was able to stay with the parents, but the fact that the parents couldn't make the call, to pull their kid out of the education system to go on a trip to Europe, where they were going to learn a lot more than they probably were going to be learning in the classroom anyways, is a really terrifying thing. And I remember people saying like, oh, that's just a one-off thing. There's no slippery slope. Don't be such an alarmist about it. And then you see the president of the teachers union saying things like this, as well as saying things like, no, it's our responsibility. Children are raised by the village, and we need to, parents share that responsibility with the government. The government shares that responsibility with parents. It's like, no, it doesn't. And also, I was right, and all the homeschooling movement people that were ringing the alarm bells about this 8-10 years ago were right. The government is constantly trying to put your kids into an indoctrination system where they go sit and listen to increasingly worse and worse role models every single day that want to push their own ideological agenda. I just saw this video of this teacher who identifies as non-binary, but she was a woman. And she's teaching these kids and saying, hey, like, I've got this little doll in my lap, and this guy, he doesn't identify as a man or as a boy or as a girl. They identify as a they, non-binary, and it has the kids recite that back to them. So, I can't remember the name, Jimmy or whatever. It's on my lap. What gender are they? Oh, non-binary. And it's terrifying to hear these kindergarten kids reciting that back. And this non-binary teacher went on to tweet about how, like, no, sometimes kids need to be protected from their parents. It's like, that's true. That's true in in the very rare cases where there's a parent that's abusive or something like that. Very rare. It's definitely the exception, not the rule. And on top of that, you mean you want to protect them in the way that the children that need protecting are the ones that have parents that don't adhere to your ideological, bends. So they twist these things. They make it seem like they're doing the best thing they can for the kid when they're really just trying to rip them away and shape them and form them into their own image that they like. So I'm glad that parents are waking up to it. I'm glad that parents, in places like West Virginia are doing things against it. It just needs to happen at a faster pace. And hopefully, within a couple generations, we have more people homeschooling, or at least public schools or private schools, taking what parents want more into consideration because of the feedback.
Yeah, I think that the move towards this it feels like it's sort of, at least from my perspective, it felt like it was sort of creeping incrementally on both sides, the feelings, and now both sides have broken into a dead sprint. Yeah. Where I think the school choice movement has really picked up a lot of momentum, which is awesome. But I also think that the people who are trying to crack down really are trying to get more control for the government and centralized power. And you think about it to the ridiculous degree that even in Washington, the legislative sessions going on right now, there's a bill written. It's not been voted on or anything like that, but there's an education bill that's been written that would make it so it would create a new complaint process so that anyone, you don't have to be in the school district, you don't have to be an administrator, you don't have to be a parent, literally anyone can lodge a complaint against a school district's curriculum choices if they are defying the law or making it illegal for or whatever reasons that is, or some complaint that they can constrain. And then the office of the state superintendent of public instruction, that is essentially Washington State's, education director, can then defund that school district by 20% and override the local school board on the curriculum being taught. Okay. So the idea here is to be able to crack down on districts like in ours. I know that, oh shoot, what's that place? I think it's not, it's somewhere in the Tri-Cities. I think Kennewick, I think, and then one other. Some of these schools and districts have specifically banned critical race theory ideology from being taught. And so now this bill is trying to make it so that anyone across the state can say this school is not teaching these CRT books that are required. And then the state can come in and say, hey, even though you're a democratically elected local school board that's supposed to represent the interests of the people in your district that that are local there, we're going to take away the authority from you to prescribe books, and we're going to prescribe the books that we want taught there, and you're fined 20%. So what this reveals to me is multiple things. One, all of the complaints that these public schools have about funding and about how they never get enough money, they don't care about that because they're willing to defund districts they don't like. Okay, so they're willing to hold children's educations hostages if it's as dire as they say for this. Two, I don't even like the idea of school boards controlling what my child is being taught. I think school boards are a level out of control, but that is too much out of control for the government. They think that school boards that are locally elected officials, they think those officials are too free to pick within the constraints of the law, and they want to be able to swoop in as the state and control that. And so, people talk about all the momentum coming up for school choice, which is great, but the aggression towards trying to control and trying to really be co-parent, if not sole parent of your child's education, has been really, really latching on from pro-government people these days. And that's the other funny thing. Last thing I'll say here. The other funny thing about this poll is saying most parents don't like the school culture wars. Yeah, I don't like the school culture wars either, because I want you to keep your freaking hands off our children. That's not a good poll to indicate that people don't like school choice or don't like being able to redirect funding to students or whatever the thing is. It doesn't prove her side is popular, which is a bad argument to begin with, and this doesn't even prove that. So it's a very weird thing to highlight from her, I think.
Yeah, I mean it's the equivalent of saying like most people don't like Ebola. Like most people don't like Ebola, so therefore, just stop trying to seek a treatment for it or a cure for it. It's like, no, like we don't like Ebola, and that's why, all these parents have woken up with the Zoom school and all this stuff. Then they now hear like what's actually going on. They're waking up to the realities of the fact that they've been sending, their kids will spend a third of their time, maybe even more, amongst people that believe crazy things and want to teach their children crazy things. So yeah, I think this is a great, obviously it's a great tweet. It's a great movement. And I really am optimistic about the sentiment among parents in America.
Yep. I completely agree. Okay, we'll move to our next take here. This reads, in 2023, there have been more mass shootings, 37, in America than days, 23. Okay, what do you think about that there, Britt?
So we've done kind of a version of this a few times now. And I must admit, I'm not super well read on the mass shootings, quote unquote, so far in 2023. But I do know that this is a trick in general, right? Maybe there's a chance, the general understanding of what mass shootings are is a gunman walks into a bar or a school or something like that and shoots as many people as they can. Obviously awful. But that's not the actual definition of mass shootings that the statistic usually comes from. The definition is any gun incident, gun-related incidents where 4 or more people are shot, injured, or killed. So that can range from actually being struck by a bullet to having some sort of ear damage. There's an example of I think it was in 2019. During some kid brought a gun to school, not to shoot anyone, but was just showing it to his friends. It went off. No one was hit, but a bunch of kids experienced ear damage. That would have made the list, right, of mass shootings that happened that year in 2019. And then the MacIver Institute, you can look up. It's MACIVER Institute.com. They have a fantastic kind of debunking of this that they wrote in 2021. And they state here that I believe it was since 1966, when the first actual mass murder with a gun occurred. We've averaged about, where this place would say, we have a mass shooting for every day of the year. We've averaged more like 3.4 mass murders every year, where someone walks into a public place with a gun and decides to shoot a bunch of people. Most of the other gun-related deaths that occur, right, in America, I think it's like 12,000 gun deaths occur each year. Basically, almost all of those are either suicide with a handgun or gang-related violence with a handgun. I think it's something like 120 of them are done with some sort of rifle, like an AR-15. So you're more likely to get killed by a blunt object, in someone's hand than an AR-15. So it's a very disingenuous statistic. I don't like it. I hate it every time I see it because it's awful. Anytime, one mass shooting is an awful thing, right? Mass murder where multiple people are dead. The stuff that happened in California is awful. But we don't benefit finding the solution by lying about what's going on and by exaggerating aspects of the problem over the aspects that actually matter and that help us identify what we need to be doing.
Yeah. The other aspect is that if there have been 37 mass shootings in 2023, but it's interesting that you only hear a few featured, right? Because there are only a few that really they can spin into a narrative of what they want to make it. So many of what get put in the category of mass shootings have to do with cartels, have to do with gangs, have to do with groups that are getting their weapons in ways that would be completely unimpacted by laws, right? The usually the weapons that are being used in mass shootings across the board are either ones that you'd have to, that like by and large are used to deter way more crime, used to defend yourself from petty theft, from other violent interactions, like handguns. And then when people are talking about fully automatic weapons, those ones are technically banned and illegal as of now, and are being put into the hands of people who are the only ones willing to have them, which are criminals. So all of these kinds of ban ideas on weapons are a lot more complicated and dangerous than proponents would have you believe. If you were to totally ban all forms of weapons, one, good luck trying to get that to happen. Two, you would have a massive spike in violent crimes because people could get away with things that they now can't because of deterrence and just general self-defense mechanisms that people have. And then you would also leave it so that the only people left with guns are crooks. And I mean that both as criminals and as government employees.
Yeah. This is the same type of logic that, if we're going to use these things that where you could correlate, but you can't actually associate it with the cause. You could say, the mass shooting in California. Well, California has some of the strictest gun laws in the country, yet a mass shooting occurred there. In fact, most mass shootings or mass murders occur in places where they are, quote unquote, gun-free zones. So maybe we need to do away with gun-free zones, right? That's the same type of logic. I'm not saying that's what it needs to be, right? Like I think that a private business in places that are sensitive can say, hey, I don't want to have weapons in here, right? Like that's their right. I don't think that the government can go and enforce that and say that. And then people that do own weapons that feel safe with them will avoid those establishments and such. But I mean, it's that correlation is closer to the cause. It's closer to helping us figure out how to solve this than just saying like, well, we need to ban guns, right? Like, and that's the fallacy that a lot of these people create is they're like, well, they look at it from one dimension. They say, well, there's a bunch of guns. Well, it's like, well, most people that commit these crimes are people that shouldn't have had the guns and they somehow got around your restrictions anyways. So what makes you think that they're not going to? I mean, if you could snap your fingers and suddenly all guns were vaporized, maybe I could see a little bit of argument towards that, but I still don't. I think you'd have a really bad consequence because then people who are, not as physically capable are not able to defend themselves, right? That's the Colt quote, which is, God made man, but Colt made him equal, right? Because I was telling my dad about this. I was like, look, if you're in a dark alleyway and you got Mike Tyson on the other side of it, and he's at least 30 feet away from you, and you've got a handgun, doesn't matter how good Mike Tyson is with his boxing hands. You've got a 50-50 shot of beating him, maybe even better. I put my money on the person with the gun in that instance. So That's the beauty about these things, is that they make people equal. They allow people who are law-abiding citizens to defend themselves, and we are not better off by making people who are law-abiding, who would never commit mass shootings or hurt anyone else other than in self-defense, making them less capable and less have less ability to do that.
Yeah, the last fallacy I want to address, it kind of stirred up from what you were talking about with the gun-free zones, is I've seen certain people cite statistics that I don't remember if it was schools specifically or what the parameter was, but there was some statistic about how normal areas that were gun-free, I think it was schools, but it may not have been, but like schools with armed guards, for instance, or armed schools or armed areas of a certain type were more likely to encounter violence and gun violence than those without. And the fallacy that you have to recognize there is that those areas probably did not start with armed guards. That was probably brought in as a measure because those areas have violence, right? So, and then of course, if you have another hostile engagement of some kind, then if the weapon needs to come into play, then yes, your gun-related incidents and incidents of violence are going to go up, but oftentimes they're used in defensive ways or in ways that would have ended up a lot bloodier without them. And again, generally speaking, if you have an armed guard, it's usually done, retroactively. It was done out of a need or out of a concern for that area. It's kind of like trying to compare charter schools that take in disadvantaged kids and compare their scores directly to the nearest public school and say, oh, look, the public school is doing way better. When you account for where you're starting with both, charter schools way outperform public schools relative to the disabilities or low backgrounds that's some more challenging circumstances might create for those students. Same thing with these violent areas. Oftentimes you will have armed guards because the area is more violent, and so incidents do occur at a higher rate, but that's because, and that was the need for the armed weapon that could be adding that deterrence.
I remember seeing those posts about that, and that it's like you got to compare it relative to the source, that and time is a vector in that.
Yes.
So
exactly right. Okay, moving to our last post. We're responding to a comment on a post from PragerU. PragerU poses the question, what tax rate is fair? And it warmed my heart to see so many replies in there saying things like none, 0%, and theft is never fair. But that is not what we are focusing on today. Today we are looking at the comment, 10%. God set the precedent. If God doesn't need more, government doesn't need more. What do you think, Britt? Does government obey the tithing rule?
This person obviously thinks that God is on the same level as the government. So that's, is this where the 10% flat tax thing came from? I always wondered where that came from.
I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure. I obviously there was a Herman Cain's 999 plan, which was 9% flat taxes on 3 different sectors, but I don't know if the 10% came from tithing or not.
Why did he do 9?
I don't remember. He had a certain breakdown.
You flip it over, it's 666. That's just like asking for it. That's asking for it, man. Yeah, God set the precedent about what? This person is obviously very theologically inept. They don't know. They've never read the Bible. They've never read the. A lot of people. I can't remember if the folks from that John podcast talked about it, but the Jesus pulling out the coin saying, images on this, and they say, well, Caesar's, and it's like, well, okay, we'll render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto God what is God's, with the obvious point being that, Caesar is made in God's image. So it's really God's image that is on that coin, right? At the end of the day. So God's commandments, from the Christian perspective, at least, about tithes and offerings has no bearing on what is fair or not fair tax. Obviously, we are to live as peacefully as possible within whatever society as Christians that we are in. That doesn't mean that we have to accept or not speak out or not have an opinion about what is right or what is fair. And I think that my view and your view that taxation is theft and therefore wrong, and therefore the only fair tax rate, the only right tax rate is 0%, is in line with my beliefs. At least I feel pretty comfortable with that. I've also had other Christians who believe that paying taxes and are the price that we pay to live in a civil society. And I've not heard a very good theological argument for that yet. That ignores, like, well, what if you take something from someone that that they don't want you to take from them, and even though you're giving them a service in exchange for it, what if they don't want that service? How is that not theft? Both from I've not heard a good argument theologically or logically against that. But there are people out there. But this person is not on the smart end of that spectrum. This person's on the not so smart end of that spectrum. Therefore, it's a bad take to me.
Yeah, I think it's, I've heard different justifications for, the appointed rulers and things like that, and needing to sustain a government in the town you live in, whatever. But to say that the tax rate being set by what God set, for us to set aside to give back to him, it's just such a, it's like, okay, so either your thought is that the government and God are in the same sort of category for you, like, oh, well, okay, so I pay 10% for my tithes, so the other thing in my life that is like God, government, yeah, he gets 10%. It's such a terrible perspective to have. Like, we view the government, and this is very revealing to me in this way, we view the government like this entity that is worth revering. Like, it is this how do I even phrase it? This entity beyond any individual's conception that exists supernaturally, that we contribute to make run, and it takes care of these big problems that us mere mortals could never solve. And that's kind of the way that people treat government in so many ways. Even, supposedly small government conservatives, like I imagine this individual is, based on their engagement with PragerU, and even saying that a 10% tax rate. Because let me be clear. I would be much happier than I am right now with tax rates if it went down to 10%. Don't get me wrong. That would be a great step forward. But when you're posed the question, what tax rate is fair? And your response is, I'm going to equate the running of the government to, my tithing to the almighty creator. I'm a little concerned about the equation in your head, even if that's not the initial point you're trying to make. I get that that's not what this person is saying, but that being the subconscious thought is where it's how you respond. Sometimes the way that you respond to something or someone is more indicative than what you would outwardly say about them.
Yeah.
If I tell my wife I love her every day, but I don't do things for her, I don't do the chores around the house, I don't, give her nice gifts every now and then, I don't tell her words of affirmation other than I love her, am I really loving her, or am I just, saying those words over and over? And so people like this can say, oh, of course the government isn't God, of course the government isn't supernatural. But then when your initial response is, let's use the same metric of tithing for how we pay the government, I just get a little, it makes me feel a little icky.
Yeah, and to maybe give this person the most charitable viewpoint, or charitable opinion of their take, I bet they've never thought about this, right? They've never thought about what tax rate is fair. They've accepted that taxes are just what we do. And so this question has never crossed their mind, and then they see it and they think, okay, how am I going to logically come up with an answer to this? Because it's a good question to answer, right? Like, both a good question to ask and a good question to answer. Usually the answer is pretty straightforward for people like us, but for this person, they have there's no bedrock, right, for them to, or bedrock principle for them to work off of when looking for how they answer this. And so it's like, well, okay, where else is paying money to something mandatory? It's like, right. Okay, well, if I'm a Christian, it's being, it's tithing. So, the government is just as mandatory as being a Christian. So therefore it shouldn't be more than 10%. And that's what I think they're probably coming from, Definitely. And so I feel a little bit bad, kind of dunking on them in that way. But there are people that hold a little bit more sophisticated views of this, that they should have that challenge, right? Where in the Bible does it say that stealing is okay? Where in the Bible does it say taking something at force from someone that they don't want, and being really coercive, enacting aggression to force your opinion on someone, or force them to do something that they don't want to do, that is, immoral and benefits you and is a detriment to them? The Bible doesn't really do that, right? Like, you just look through the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal is part of them, right? As well as thou shalt not murder. And Jesus talks about not hating your neighbor or dealing unjustly with people. So I just think that conservatives in the past 3 years have done a good job waking up to that God and government are not the same thing. But there are still people to be woken up within that movement. And once they do wake up, and once these questions are being asked, PragerU, I think, falls on the God and government are equivalent in a lot of ways. But I'm glad that they are asking these types of questions, because it makes people think. And when people start to think, they eventually arrive at the truth.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you ask this question and there isn't an easy number, it does become you have to have a principle of some kind, and it's where the small government sort of fallacy reveals itself, because it's to say, the principle of a small government conservative might be the government should only tax what it needs. What tax rate is fair? The smallest amount to run. But then, of course, you're led to, what's the smallest amount needed to run? What are the essential services of government? And then that's the ever increasing scale, depending on who you ask, over time. And then that percentage climbs ever up slightly. And so what tax rate becomes fair becomes increasingly unfair, and you end up where we are now. Yep. So it's one of those things where, unless you have a solid principle, it's very difficult to come on that number. And so it's easy to default to something like a tithe, where you were very explicitly commanded, give 10%.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's the episode for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As a reminder, we always appreciate your comments and your likes and your subscriptions and your reviews, and anything else in that vein helps us out a ton. And we will catch you on the next one.
See ya.
Take care.